You should see it in the top left. We are live, and I apologize for the delay, but if there was ever a person that I wouldn't want to be late for, and then I could have the opportunity to exercise shifting my state from a state of press and a little bit of tension about being late into just kind of trying to be present and lean in, that would be Michael Sugarman. So we're in for a big treat today. I want to lead in with a story that just happened 2 hours ago, and then the conversation will flow from there. I was talking to a young man. Now in New York City, they've just decided to go back fully virtual. So for a lot of families, that means things are going to be getting challenging again. It was kind of nice in some ways going back to having kids in school for those that were safe to do so. And again, it's another transition, another challenge to kind of find our way through. For others, another person I was just talking with in New Jersey, he's going back to school in person for the first time. And he was talking about what he wants his teacher to do. So he's a young man who stutters. And so his mom was going to write an email to the teacher. And I see the situation all the time. Michael's familiar as well. You know, how do we want to put ourselves out there? How do we want to let people know what's up? And at the same time, advocate for whatever accommodation or understanding we rightfully deserve. And at the same time, in no way compromise the dignity and the humanity that is deserving, because for a lot of people, they can mistaken difference as less than. And we want to make sure that the language you use and the messages we use. So this young man and his mom were sitting with me, and we were crafting the email that he wished his mother to send the teacher. And it was so important because had the mom gone ahead and written the email on her own, there may have been some phrases in there that may have left things unspoken, like, my son has an issue, he stutters. Well, what does it mean he has an issue? What does it mean stuttering? So we went through 3 things which are part of this framework that we started developing, and I think it's going to run nice into what Michael's going to speak about. But at the end of the day, this young man wrote down some bullet points, and the 3 parts of his self-advocacy had to do with, number 1, saying it like it is, you know, calling it by its name. Sometimes I stutter. The second part is letting him know what to expect, what behaviors might come up. So you might notice that I repeat some sounds, or you might see that I have a little, I know what I want to say, but there's a little delay there. And then the third part is letting other people know what you want them to do. And it was so interesting. It's always so surprising because some people don't want to have the responsibility to present in front of class or read aloud or present in teleconference calls. Other people are itching for the opportunity, like this young man, they just want a few extra seconds of response time and to have some allies. And so what I was impressing upon them, and I want to share with everybody who may be going through these different shifts in terms of school placements or jobs and distance and remote, the importance to find your happy place, to think about what you really, how you can go ahead and go for the things that you want to go for, while at the same time acknowledging what is and calling it by whatever name works for you, and then letting the people in your life know how you want them to deal with it. Because the more it's revealed and less of an elephant, the more we have a chance to connect and transcend and really be everything we want to be. And the more we leave it unspoken and we don't name it, it can become very scary. With that introduction of practical, flexible advice, I just want to say I got off the phone with my dad this morning, and I said, how exactly do you introduce Michael Sugarman? For those that don't know, I will not even attempt, but I will say this much. Michael is a champion. He's been a champion and an activist, always speaking up for his principles, and being there not only to advocate for himself as a person who stutters, but really being a leader in the global movement to create more understanding and more access, inclusion, and openness about stuttering for the community of people who stutter around the world. And he has been a champion for people who are marginalized in many different ways. And he has a career as a professional in mental health. He's had the privilege to work with some of the greatest pioneers in that space. And so he's going to bring a lot of wisdom from his personal story, from his volunteer activism, in the community of people who stutter, and all kinds of efforts, both in his professional and personal intersections. So it's with great honor to really bring this conversation and have Michael join us. And I'll let you introduce yourself, Michael, but thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very grateful to be here and share this. So what I'm going to be focusing on is how in behavioral health, we integrate mindfulness and meditation into our therapy practice. And then there's twofold things. In behavioral health, we use ACT, mindfully, it's called. We use mindful-based cognitive therapy, as well as dialectical behavior therapy. Now, we do both of those. We do group in DBT, in individual, that I'll do a mindful-based cognitive therapy. So let's go with an exercise that I know is on a lot of people's minds is avoidance. But I will use the term that we use in dialectical behavior therapy. So sit back, take some breaths in. I'm going to ring a bell. This is a common practice within dialectical behavior therapy, what we do in our groups. We begin a group session with a mindful meditation and a focus. So I'm going to ring the bell. I want you to just sit and breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Breathe in and out. On your left shoulder, there is somebody who loves you. Could be from your past, a past teacher, your present, your father, mother, grandparent, somebody that you feel loved by. Now, on the other shoulder, could be the same person, but who you feel comfortable in talking with, sharing your experience, talking about personal items. What we're going to be focusing on now is avoidance. You have a chance to talk to the person that you feel most comfortable sharing of what you've been avoiding. Sit there with that. Now, on the other side, I want you to share the opposite action from what you were avoiding to what you're going to be doing. Talk to the person who loves you and share for a moment what you're thinking. I'm going to ring the bell. I want you to breathe in and out, and when the bell ends, we can talk. So that's how we begin our dialectical behavior therapy group session. And obviously, how come I chose avoidance is since it's such a big theme for Joe and for this community. Did something come up for you? Like something that you've been trying to avoid that you're going to do the opposite action by any chance?
So I'll be honest, I didn't hook into that, but I had a
Okay.
meaningful deep dive.
That's okay. So remember, when you're a therapist, that's okay. You go into that deep dive. Then we come out of that and then we discuss like opposite action. Like one big thing that I've done, one short group of people who stuttered, but I'm not a therapist. I mean, I'm no longer a licensed, so it was kind of like a teaching skills as well as to professionals. And some of the things that coming up was to making a phone call. It may sound simple to some, but it was just, I'm going to just make that phone call. So the opposite action was, I'm going to actually make that phone call. And the reason why we do loving kindness is because we want to have the person feeling comfortable to share with you, Uri, either in an individual or in a group setting. So the interesting thing for us, it comes out of Team CBT. That's from a lot of David Burns stuff. I got a chance when I was at Stanford. So he was one of the creators, like Beck, of CBT. So like Beck has moved into cognitive therapy recovery, and Burns has moved into Team CBT. So this is just, and behavioral health means neuroscience, mental health, and now we're going with a social health as well, because we're dealing with homelessness and financial problems, and this could come back to you. So then at the end of the session of the first, when you're doing your individual session, I like of when you were talking the other day about, oh, I start off with, so how are you? So what's going on with you? We think at the end of the session is to test what had just occurred during that session. Now, remember, you have to remember too, that CBT and DBT is a pretty structured format. So really what you're doing and what we're doing here is teaching skills in a therapeutic way. Of course, when there's something heavier, of course, we'll go into more of a DBT trauma, related, but yeah.
Can I ask you, Michael, just to bring everybody up to speed, that evolution, because a lot of people think of psychology is like going to be an endless journey of intense psychoanalysis and going into the past. Can you just shed a little light into this whole wing or branch of psychotherapy? And yeah, just as an approach, it's so different than what many people have assumed psychotherapy to be and mental health to be. I think it would be nice to shed some light in a big.
Yeah, okay, so enlighten that. So what happened was during the 80s, David Burns and Beck saying like there was more of a kind of like how to get a person point A to point B and point C with self-care skills. More of a teaching therapeutic way of dealing with things and items. So in neuroscience, it's based, so that's the reason why you have the mindfulness comes in, because how the brain, mind, rational brain, wise mind, in DBT terms, we move through those stages. And I'm sorry, I'm just going back and forth to my, so what has happened in psychotherapy is that we've been influenced by Eastern philosophy. Like for myself, like I was really fortunate to have been at Stanford Med when, I mean, unfortunate and fortunate in both ways, when the AIDS epidemic hit. So it was kind of like mindfulness came into play in the early 90s. And then the psychologists figure out that there's got to be a format to the groups. You know, it's similar to what you put together, but it's more of a kind of like a CBT and DBT model. So what we're doing is that we're bringing a skill set to people. Now back to Joseph Sheehan. So then in the 90s, there's a lot of us, you know, okay, well, there's a mental health parity act that we demonstrated for and got passed. So we're paid for. That means a licensed marriage family therapist, LCSW, a psychologist, and Jerry, Jerry McGuire. Also, during that time, what we moved into, like for some of us, that we came from a self-help perspective. So we saw the integration of a peer into our work rather than going outside like a one-stop shop. Not saying that this, okay, so these peer groups are post self-care after therapy. And so we could talk about that. So I'm not saying demolish, dismiss peer support groups. We're not at all. What we're doing, yeah.
This is wonderful, and there's a lot of feedback, Michael. People, first of all, calling you the GOAT, which is the acronym for the greatest of all time, coming from Doug in Texas.
Hey,
and Tom Sharstein is liking the legend description. And Sigurdur Frostberg, I believe Sweden, Iceland, Sweden. Yeah. She's saying, wonderful interview. And again, I just don't want to make any assumptions, Michael. Can you unpack? She's asking, can you explain the acronyms? ACT, CBT, if you want to weave that back in. But the last point you said, I just want to make sure I got it right, because I think it's an interesting insight. It's an important conversation. A lot of evidence-based practice looks at the effect of different elements and whether they are valid and whether the rigor of the scientific method shows that they seem to have an impact. And that's important. What often gets missed is what you end up with is an array of different things that have some sort of evidence base. But what you were just describing was kind of like maybe how things get lined up sequentially, or in other words, the idea of peer support. This is an interesting idea. You're talking about it happening in sequence, right? After some kind of a therapeutic individual experience. I think that's a whole conversation, but I just wanted to highlight that. I think that's a subtle but very novel point for people to consider, that an intervention of any sort, first of all, it can't be one size fits all for everyone. But this idea of the timing, and this goes into Patricia Zabrowski's work with the stages of change and lining up what people need at different stages. The thing that could be helpful in a later stage might be unhelpful or hurtful at an earlier stage, and the importance of considering some of those things. So I just wanted to resonate with that point. And then when you get a chance to circle back to the acronyms for those that want to know about that.
The ACT is acceptance commitment therapy, DBT is dialectical behavior therapy, and CBT is cognitive behavior therapy. But what I use is a mindful based. And that is what we were just showing at the start. So, so let's go back to Joe Sheehan, for example. Now, Joe Sheehan, avoidance was really popular at that particular time when he came into psychology and presented this. Now, UCLA is one of the leaders in mindfulness-based therapy. So if we assume that he lived today, that he would have done that introduction that I just did into avoidance. Now, we've come a long way in therapy, where I think in stuttering therapy, I think you may want to start looking at, more things like self-compassion, anxiety, shame, and self-acceptance.
Just as a quick reference, my last conversation with Robin Croft down at UT Austin with with Courtney Bird, we talked exactly about that, some of that self-care and
Okay. Yeah. Well,
self-compassion and the research on that. So I think that's definitely just another anchor. You could listen to Robin talk more about it, but what Michael's talking about is what's amazing about Michael, just a quick parentheses, is like some people get old and some people get young. And Michael has a finger on the pulse and continues to evolve. And that's what's exciting, is what Michael's talking about is a lifespan of his own journey and perspective and insight. But what he's talking about is so cutting edge, and he's helping you bring the black and white images of Joseph Sheehan, for example, into contemporary 2020 full color, which is a unique thing that you're going to get in this conversation that you don't get from just reading a manuscript or from, you know, just throwing things in the sky. So yeah,
well,
this is amazing.
It makes sense that Courtney would be involved in that, because Karen Neff is from Austin, who is the big person in self-compassion. So if you take a look at, the Dhruv and I have put together a 6-week format, it's just basically for you to take nuggets from that. There's mindful-based cognitive therapy techniques, like cognitive reframing would be a thing. The thing that we just went through with dialectical behavior therapy of the opposite action. So let's move to another thing, and I'll get back to the peer thing. And what I would like to address is apps. There are so many apps where somebody like Uri has to inform his clients about Calm, Insight Timer, scanning, breath scanning. The exercise that we just went through was just a loving kindness that helps people to focus. And a really good book, and I know that you guys are going to go, oh God, it looks so young, but it's called Master of Mindfulness. It was helped by Kabat-Zinn, who is basically the mover and the shaker of the mindfulness-based stress reduction that became mindful-based cognitive therapy. And the nice thing about this particular book, it goes through 4 different meditation exercises. So the body scan, for example, it doesn't really address the loving kindness because that's more of a clinical. However, we've been seeing more people to use that.
I'm just going to mention, for those of you trying to jot everything down, Michael has shared with me, and I'll post afterwards on our blog page, this video conversation, as well as all the links to the different apps and resources that Michael suggests.
Yeah, and then you could do our article, because you as a therapist, just the whole idea is for you guys to take the nuggets and integrate it into your practice.
Michael, this is not a plug. It's not a plug, but I just want to share, and again, just you don't need me to do this, but just to amplify what Michael's saying, people often think, well, that's not going to work with this person, or this person's too young. The concepts and the approaches that Michael's talking about are the kinds of things we need to learn more about, because they speak to the fact that a person is a person. They're not just a pair of lips. And if we're just working on lips, we're missing the whole driver, the whole spirit of the person, the whole person, nothing to do with anything spiritual, but just the whole person. So we've got to learn more. So just as a short anecdote, we have this group of teenagers going through this 4-part framework. We made this Transcending Stuttering framework, and there's a whole unit. One of the 4 is self-acceptance. And we introduced some nuggets, Michael, from CBT, and the therapist was facilitating these teenagers. And I was wondering, would it fly over their heads? Would it fall flat? Would they enjoy the video pieces that we did? And these teenagers, when they heard about thoughts and feelings and behaviors as a cycle, the kid said to the group, "That's so spot on. It just all clicked. Now I understand like what's been going on for me, the cycle." And it was a game changer, because it gave the person a chance to kind of like be their own, observe themselves, have that view on themselves, and then be able to maybe choose some things differently. So I just don't assume any of this is too high or too lofty or only for certain audiences. This is stuff that speaks to the humans. And
Well,
if
you're
you're interested in
absolutely
helping
right.
humans, you should give it a shot.
Well, and also because you're doing with stuttering, we did a professional group too that joined our group, and she used the body scan with a teen who stuttered and got connected to when they're stuttering. So, I just want to, and the mindfulness practice is being used throughout the whole aura of therapy. So that's the reason why it's going to be really important for the clinician to decide with your client if you're going to use calm, insight timer, breathe to relax, what kind of apps. Now, the next issue that I was going to talk about is not an issue, but you brought it up with, and so did Hilda in her article. And that is, we have an app that's called My Strength. It's a digital format that has CBT and ACT. It's paid by Kaiser to have this app. It's called My Strength. Now, they have a success rate of 83% on the app, and as well as in-person therapy. But okay, so this is individual therapy. So they didn't talk, and Hilda's article didn't talk about what happens like in our work if you combine individual and therapy groups doing these kinds of practices. But what I don't know, because there hasn't been a study, but this is what we do in our wellness clinics. We combine them too. So when you do apps, that's another app that you might want to look at. I don't know if you'll be able to get that app for people because you're not a mental health professional, but I don't know. I don't know. The other app that is really popular, that is a 74% they've been doing. Oh, this is another app that's called Thrive Global. It's put out by Stanford Med, and the Huffington Group is invested heavily. So you'll see this in your workplaces. It's called Thrive Global. So you could see a lot of applications are being done in mental health. Let's see if I could just get to it. I have Thrive Global, but so let's see one more. Of course, there's yoga. There's a one called the neurosciences are saying that it works. It's called Fit Mind.
So Michael, when you say that they say it works, similar to the questions we're always asking,
75 to 80% effective.
It almost, but
mental health.
Put just to specify, like Pfizer threw out their percentage with their vaccine.
Yeah.
It's hard to figure out what are we measuring. So when you're saying they have that impact, can you describe what that's measuring?
Sure.
Success with what? Success doing?
Okay, I'll tell you in a sec.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for you as a therapist in stuttering, it's for a person to communicate more effectively. Now, how do you base that on? Is it life experience, their quality of life improves? How would you? For us in the therapy world, we have two scales: anxiety scale and a depression scale. So if a person comes in with a score of 22, which is near severe depression, the insurance company actually tells us, 6 sessions with cognitive behavior therapy and 2 6-week sessions with dialectical behavior therapy. So the hope is by the end of those sessions, that 22 score goes down to 8 or 9. So it's a mild depression. That's where we come in to like Doug and Tom and Sig with the self-help movement, which would be, okay. So the third thing is really important in your therapy work, that is gratitude journal writing. So you want to make sure that your clients come away with that, with writing notes to themselves about what just happened. Wow, I just stuttered then, but how do I feel about it? How do I feel? What's the positive? What's the cognitive reframe to that? Oh, I made it through the speech. Okay, I got a C on it or something, but I made it through. I'm still alive. I mean, it really depends on how and you communicate with your client, for the person that stutters. So
one of the things. Oh, go ahead.
Well, okay, so like you have 3 items that are working. You have apps to help you for when the client leaves your room, to work with their apps, that maybe 5 minutes of meditation, walking meditation. It's your decision. For us in the mental health field, we'd like them to use the apps that I mentioned for mental health, to just help them, to effectively, kind of like work on their issue. And gratitude journal writing, that would be on your iPhone, just to chart down of what's going on for you. So the whole issue is self-care. Now comes the interesting thing about the integration. Okay.
So if I could say one thing about this previous point, to me, that's what we do to a degree. And I think a lot of people are not yet doing enough of it. But if you buy into an app, or you're able to access an app, or if you can't, I'll just share 2 quick thoughts how you can do this today. With every client that we work with, we create a Google Doc. And that way, across platforms, whether it's during our meetings, we can have some writing and written exercises, whether it's between our meetings. And then we have a running journal, and they can have things they keep to themselves, or they could have things they share. So that's one aspect. And in the group, we have sometimes some shared documents, glean from one another their own personal reflections. We also use voice notes sometimes, or we'll bring together a group of people, like mentors and young people, in an asynchronous way. And they can, if typing isn't their thing or it's too cumbersome, but leaving a little voice note and saving it as a collection of little anecdotes of reflecting, talking to yourself, giving yourself those messages. Very powerful. And the apps that are freely available make it so easy. And the apps that Michael's talking about really formulate it and structure it. So if you can take advantage of those, go for it. But don't let that stop you if you can't get those. I think there are a lot of ways to.
Absolutely. I mean, because once they leave you and see like Tom's group or Doug's group or Sig's in the self-help group, we'd like them to kind of like continue what you've taught them in the clinic situation. So it's not like saying self-help group.
Dependence. Right.
Yeah.
Going from dependence to independence, right? And whether the dependence is on a professional guide or community, getting to a point that you can hold yourself.
Community building. Correct.
Beautiful.
Now, what we've done and what we found, now Sig is perfect for this kind of a group exercise because she's in that age range, doing homework assignments, wanting to do it, listening to you and doing it. But what we found so I'm 67, but when we're older, we don't do the homework exercises. And that's where it just happens that way. That's just how it is. So, so that's something that you could think about if you work with older clients, of whether or not they're doing the homework assignments. So these assignments are just basically what you're doing in your life to make it easier and make it positive. So, okay, so how we use peer specialists, of course, we have them trained before they come into the clinic. And what they would do would be run like a DBT, a dialectical behavior therapy, just to understand the language. Because in dialectical behavior therapy, there's distress tolerance, emotional regulation, but the focus again is on mindfulness. It's the beginning. Now, since Doug's, I mean, they're pretty, like Tom and Doug and Sig would probably be perfect to work with the Schneider Institute as a peer therapist, a peer specialist. But so in my setting, that would be somebody to just do, things like employment. The other day they were talking about, for them to navigate, however you as a therapist would talk to the client about anxiety, about going to the interview. The peer would help to navigate where to go and what would be the best job.
So again, just to reflect, I'm just trying to distill, because you're getting some really rich gems. So just for those that maybe this would be helpful, I think what I hear Michael saying is there's so much benefit from obviously a multifactorial perspective and a holistic look at life and challenges and what it is you're trying to achieve and where you're getting stuck. But the role of a professional guide in one arena, the role of a peer, the role of an app, that these things can be leveraged in different ways, that one is not mutually exclusive to the other. Is that fair?
Yes. However, you come equipped with these clinical skills that the peer does not. So when they leave your clinic, we like them to be self-care, and they would go to like Doug, Tom, Sig in the self-help group, or the WSN, and be knowledgeable enough. Like you put together a really good 6-week session that could be adapted maybe. I mean, it's something that one of the fall points of peers is their skill level and their training level. And so that's how come that it's so vital once they leave your clinic situation and they go see Tom, Doug, and Sig, that they already know the skills. They reinforce the skills.
So what you're saying is the importance of the common language.
Common language is really important.
And then the following experience of the peer group, if the peer group is speaking a different language, so let's say one uses the words in stuttering of, let's say, advertising,
yeah,
and one uses self-disclosure, and another one uses openness, what happens then, Michael?
It gets so confused. So we use more of a dialectical behavior therapy peers, because they know that language of emotional regulation, distress tolerance. So you're absolutely right. So somebody like Tom or Doug, if they were in my clinic, that they would follow up and do a weekly check-in with people about, wise mind, wise speech, listening skills, and how they're doing as a check-in. But using the same language that they've learned in the therapy room.
Right.
So that goes back to what we've always discussed. There is called standard of care, which for stuttering, it's got to be, I mean, you guys have to decide your standard of care. Is it going to be ACT, CBT, probably not dialectical behavior therapy, but something about a group that I know that you guys use arts, but through Vivian's work, but it would be nice to do that as a 3.0. I mean, it's like 2020 situation. So everybody's on the same wavelength. And the scope of care is you would be clinical skills in individual and group. And then somebody like Tom, what he's doing would be post-clinic, and what Doug's doing with SIG in the self-help is postclinic. So you're all on the same wavelength.
I think in a utopian and idyllic sense, it would be amazing if all the shareholders would be able to find a common language and a common approach. I think inherent in the challenge is that we have so many different people and many doing different work that's having a wonderful contribution. What's your thought, Michael, about the fact that
We've done it.
We've done it. You share about that because different, let's say even DBT and CBT and ACT, and then you've got, other approaches here and other approaches there. Each one comes with its own, vernacular, which is somewhat exclusive to another. What are your thoughts about how do we practically bring in, like you said, a more consistent thread of language and terminology so that we're not adding more confusion, but more clarity?
More clarity is if you all get together and do like a Zoom meetings, like 20 of you. And I mean, it's a similar thing of what's happening with the Biden campaign, basically. They do these Zoom meetings, get people together, send in their policymakers, and come out with some kind of congruent thing. And then you'll have some of the stakeholders, somebody like Tom, Doug, or Siggy involved, so they could hear what. So there is this standard of care that's happening.
In developing what we did with that Transcending Stuttering framework, which is this video course and the companion printable guide, I actually worked on getting a lot of people's input. One person, Anita Blom, was deeply involved and contributed a lot. And one of the things that I heard from a lot of people, and I'd love your input on this, because on the one hand, well, the dilemma is there's a lot of professional lingo that's out there. And a lot of it has developed over time or has lingered over time and needs to be developed. The idea, for example, of common words like stuttering modification or pseudo-stuttering or fluency shaping, these are terms that were coined quite some time ago. We deliberately we're not against any one term or another per se, but find it less helpful because one person's understanding of that, another person's understanding of that is totally different. And it may also bring up feelings and, different connotations or experiences. What are your thoughts about moving towards a language that's more common, more phenomenological, and actually not jumping into any one or another where it becomes kind of exclusively CBT terminology or exclusively this term? What do you think of that?
Mindful communication. And then under that becomes effective communication. I mean, the funny thing about mindfulness is, we started to use that back in the 80s, but it wasn't as popular until Barack Obama started to use mindful speech. And then all of a sudden, it's Barack Obama was the one who brought mindfulness into our culture.
Right.
Emotional regulation has become a cultural thing that people use. That's a dialectical behavior term that we used during the 90s. So I do think if you broaden your scope to communication or effective communication and, or mindful communication, that would be helpful. There's also terms that are being used with fluency. It's called emotional fluency by Brene Brown. Emotional fluency, that is being able to talk about your emotions. Now,
reading there's always been one that's out there, reading fluency.
Yeah.
So the word fluency becomes kind of co-opted by all kinds of different intentions.
And your intention is, your group is to making it communication.
One of the things that we do in the group, either individual groups, meaning clinician and person, or clinician and family, or small group facilitation, we have everybody kind of find their own language, how they want to describe that experience of a word getting stuck, the physical feeling of it, the name of it, if they like the word stammer or stutter. It's so interesting. All of this is so interesting because words start to carry meaning and they also start to carry feelings, and they can attract, they can repel, or they can be more descriptive and not judgmental, or they can be more judgmental. The impact of that, you want to just talk about language really matters.
language matters. And that's the reason why we're asking people more doing the journal writing and mindfulness practices and meditation. You know, cognitive reframing is basically moving a negative to a positive.
Great.
And what we want, you know, people like you or like myself to do, or Tom, Doug, Sig, you know, is how do we make communication effective? And how does people feel more comfortable in going out in the world and being effective? Now, I know it's really important for clinical, for you to do clinical, or for clinicians to figure out ways. There's a lot of good stuff that's available. And I know as your field is more going to our standard care of ACT, mindfully will be, but I don't know. I mean, that's what I read in her paper, that the focus. However, she was doing individual therapy, so, you know, Hilda was.
Meaning that she's talking about ACT, but as a mental health practitioner, you're thinking ACT in that context.
Well, I'm thinking of, okay, well, if you're going to do that, you have to combine it with a group therapy.
Right.
And if you want to do group therapy, then these are some of the things that we laid out as 3.0 for Vivian to do, and for, you know, Sheehan would definitely do something like that. I mean, I can't imagine him not to. He's at, you know, one of the leading schools in the country.
I think what's interesting to me is that point you just made, that the research and the literature has really been moving in a really positive direction, looking much more broadly than just at the physical behavior of stuttering, for sure, looking at a evidence base for these types of approaches. But I think it's striking that you find, as you said, the discussion of ACT, but then you look at how it was delivered, and it wasn't delivered in a classical ACT sense. There's still a need for the interpretation and the application. You want to just share a little bit about that, about how we practically bring some of this knowledge and wisdom to life?
Well, you will, because I think eventually somebody, either Krista, you know, Camilla does a lot of practical skills with mindfulness, you know, so I think, you know, there's a ACT mindfully is now, you know, being talked about in your field. And every time when ACT is brought up, I said, well, are you doing mindfully? Are you doing both practices? Are you doing clinical group as well as the individual group? So if we know that acceptance commitment therapy and cognitive behavior therapy is 83% effective, that's individually on the base. Can we look at, if we add group and maybe people like Tom, Doug into the mix, you know, to make it maybe 90%?
Well, we have lots more to explore, because what we rolled out, it was intended and being thought through way before COVID. But in these times of distancing, it becomes all the more helpful to have the apps you're talking about, or different ways that people can move themselves forward between times where they have the access to an individual, or to an individual professional or a peer group. What are your thoughts about where we're at with that and the value of that? The question I hear a lot is, like, during these times of social distancing, how can I possibly do anything for my young child or my adult child or myself? All the doors are closed, and it feels like technology is so artificial. You want to share anything about that?
Well, practicing self-care skills. I mean, here's some, I mean, you know, simple things like spending 5 minutes to yourself, reading a book, meditating. I know one of the big things in my field, because I worked with depression, was making your bed every morning.
Habits. I saw that in your 6-week routine.
Yeah.
It's one of the exercises, is creating these small rituals and habits. They create little micro, you know, I read something a while ago. You're from the Bay Area, right?
Yeah. So, you know,
So-
so we have a lot of like this mindfulness practices like Rick Hansen. And can I just give a plug?
Yeah, please go.
Okay. So in my strength platform at Digital, it came out of some of our interns at Stanford, which makes sense, right? They're clinical social workers, move into the tech world. Of course, that we're kind of like upset that they didn't stay in our world, but you know, they're your age group, Uri, or you know, or
They're
Sid.
also younger than me, but that's I take the compliment.
Okay, so two more things I want to just really quickly
Totally.
address, and then I'm going to show you one exercise that'd be really fun to do.
But fundamentally, I think what I just wanted to get your insight on as who you are, would you agree that no one should think that this time we're living in should be a time where people should kind of hang in and wait until the old ways come back and we're too distant to do anything? On the contrary, would you suggest all the more so there's a need for learning skills of self-care and moving yourself forward?
Oh, absolutely. Like, especially right now, we're on Zoom. So person that stutters has to see themselves, has to actually, before we didn't have to do that. Now we have to. Now we could have some time before we come into a situation of talking with a group and saying, doing some meditation exercise, just a calming, you know, a calming meditation. What am I going to say? So that comes into Salesforce. So last week that I went over to Salesforce, or 2 weeks ago with the NSA, and they've developed a group called Ability Force, not just for people that stutter, but for all cross disabilities. And the guy that hosted that was saying that his boss says to him, go ahead and tell everybody that you stutter. And when he was interviewed, they actually gave him time. They said, just take your time. So I wonder if we're doing a cultural shift, like of what's happening, like between my age group to Tom and Doug's age group to yours, and then to
I think Ruben talked about that, and I think it should be a testament, a source of nachas for you.
Yeah.
Is like pride, that some movements are generational and they take time. He shared that in the name of Barry Yeoman, who I'll be talking to in a few weeks. But the idea that some of the seeds that you planted, Michael, and you deserve much credit for that, the seeds didn't sprout in the first season or the second season. But what you're seeing now with that kind of experience at Salesforce, major corporate atmosphere, that's something that probably was not something you could imagine when you started off on this journey of activism, right?
Oh, absolutely. And also you go with Microsoft, which is asking people to do confidential self-IDs, identification, and now they're encouraging disability pride. Now that's always a big issue within the stuttering community. Well, I'm not disabled. Am I disabled? Should I write down that I have a disability? But that could be another time.
I know you wanted to get some things in, and I'm not going anywhere till we get through the things that you'd like to share, because these are really precious. And I just want to invite anyone that's watching, your comments, your questions. Certainly you can contact me or Michael. We will have this on replay. We will put all the links and the resources that Michael is sharing together, both on Facebook and also on the blog page, schneiderspeech.com/our-blog. And if you share Michael's wisdom, that would be the most amazing thing.
Well, and like we're all working together. It's not like we're all working together. That's a really important thing about like Tom's group is going to, do with you, Doug and the NSA and all these groups around the world. They're using video now to talk. I mean, that is incredible. So I just want to end with something that I want to share. So the Stuttering and Speech Therapy of Arizona, okay, she put out this thing called Try Laughing Yoga Classes. Okay, so I don't know if you guys want to, but but we've been doing this for a while in behavioral health. I mean, I've been retired. So this is one of the exercises. As people, if you want to stand up or sit down, it's fine. I'll show you what it is. Okay. You wrap your hands around you like this, and you laugh 3 times. You go, you clap 2 times. You go, very good.
Very good. Very good.
Yay.
Woo.
So on that note, we're integrating, and Tom and Doug and Sig, those are really good, fun exercises for groups. It kind of like, it's a meditative exercise, but it's used as a part of yoga.
Let me ask you a question that kind of underlies everything you shared and also everything you shared with me. I have a complete file. I actually need an external hard drive for all the things you shared with me prior to this conversation. So many resources that I am looking up right now to share on the screen. So many wonderful things. That image of the DBT and the wise mind, I'd love to share that. If I don't find it, I'll share it afterwards. But Michael, here's the question. And I did weave this into our framework, and this is everything you're talking about, but I think it's an unspoken, and I just want to make it explicit. The function of yoga and wellness, way beyond the traditional confines and boundaries and scope of speech therapy. For people who stutter, what relevance is there to exercising, to having a good state in your mind, to dealing with mental wellness, if that's something that's significant, dealing with diet, dealing with fitness? What relevance, what bearing does that have, Michael?
Oh my God, so much, because it's mental wellness. It's wellness. I mean, like Tom just quoted and said something. There's more than just stuttering. There's your life. And I mean, just to share with you, like in our depression group that we did, we had a yoga person to come in, we had a nutritionist to come in, and this is for depression.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I feel like, we're so focused on our mouth and cognitively our head. We don't think of our whole body, and that's what this whole issue is about, is bringing our whole body. And since we're stuttering, and it is a whole body thing, it's kind of like it's a perfect way to understand what's your process that you're going on. And it's a part of that self-care. So then you're identifying your stuttering. You go, oh God, I'm stuttering now. Now it's whether or not it's going to affect you for the whole day, for 24 hours or less than that, or if you're able to talk to somebody. It could be you, it could be Tom, it could be Doug, it could be Sig, it could be somebody. But in a clinical sense, that you'd be focusing more maybe on the anxiety of it.
This has been and continues to be. And I'm going to ask you, I'll give you the question and then I'll do my little wrap and then I'll finish with one other thought. So my question to you is, what do you want to see in the next 5 to 10 years? What's your vision, your hope, your dream? And I'll let you think for a moment on that. I just want to say that this has been the richest, most profound, like we haven't had a chance to really talk one-to-one. We just kind of jumped on here, and I will be listening to this more than once. I feel an amazing kinship, also a lot of wisdom that I feel much smarter and more stimulated than I did coming in, and at the same time more grounded than I did coming in. And I just want to encourage other people to do the same. There's a lot packed in here, and as Michael said, together we can do things that we could never do alone. And so I look forward to more conversations, offline, and maybe a follow-up to this. But I just thank you and give you a chance to just give a thought of where you see we could go with the world in 5 to 10 years. And then I'll share one story about how I manage my wellness, which I think might be enlightening to some people.
Well, we're moving in that direction. We're definitely, the educational system is moving towards more to being aware. I mean, we use the term disability or differences, in the classroom. So there's more acceptance in that, in the educational. Obviously, with diversibility in the workplace, with diversity and inclusion, more people are willing to take that effort. There are people, and we have to thank the notorious RBG for that, because in '99, she led the Supreme Court with the Olmstead Act that actually gave disability services the meat to the ADA.
For the non-Americans out there, notorious RBG is not the notorious BIG. It's Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was a woman, a force to be reckoned with, a Supreme Court justice, and a real pioneer, and she passed away within the past year. So she has the name Notorious RBG. Great documentary too.
Yes. So with that kind of stuff that's happened in our world here in the United States, which is transported, it's going to be transported around the world with these conferences that you're doing. Stuttering will be viewed as, this is something I do, but it's not all of me.
Mm-hmm. This is something I do, but it's not all of me. That's where we need to be.
And you started off with that kid saying, I stutter. I mean,
that's right.
I mean, these whole situations, are the environment is making it easier to quote unquote disclose, which you guys use in the old days that we used the term coming out, but people thought, but it was these terms and language.
Right. Well, I'm tempted to share another story, which I'm going to hold for another time. But again, I just want to thank you. And I just want to share, I had a call yesterday with a colleague of mine. I won't say who it is, but we meet on a regular basis and we have real heart-to-hearts and kind of support one another. So I think it's important also just to share that practitioners, in speech pathology don't have the concept of supervision. And it's an important element for any practitioner to have someone that they check in with and kind of air things out and get guidance. It's a real sore missing piece. We hope to be offering that for people that are looking for it, but people should seek it out for themselves wherever they feel fit. But for myself, I don't stutter. Some people have thought that I stutter. Why would I be so invested? Why would I be doing all this? And it's a great honor that someone would think that, because it shows a level of empathy and connection and understanding. I don't stutter, but I still have to do all the things that Michael talked about. So a couple of years ago, my rabbi told me, you got to start running. I said, why? He says, you got to manage your stress. And since then, I became a runner. And for me, running 2 to 3 times a week. And then in between those days that I run, some basic calisthenics. I use the 7-minute workout. There's no machinery involved, no gym required. You can do it at home in just a few minutes and different variations of it. Also scientifically based. Great outcomes. You do that, you can really add years to your life, but also add life to your years. And the other piece that Michael talked about, the importance, we schedule ourselves back to back. I talk about these micro vacations. It's a concept I stole from Jack Dorsey, who runs Twitter and Square. And now he does it differently with 2 hours a day of meditation. But he used to do this thing called a micro vacation, where he would just in his mind drift into that pleasant place. And even if it was a matter of 30 seconds or 5 minutes between meetings, being deliberate about taking care of ourselves and not just responding to the needs of our inbox or our pings and dings is so important. And I think when you hear Michael talk about apps, you might scratch your head and say, more apps? I'm trying to get away. I'm trying to disconnect. Yeah. The importance of integrating healthy technology, since we're so hooked up anyway, is, I think, critical as part of a healthy way of living. If you're going to have technology, you're going to be on the grid, you need to integrate the kind of good stuff that's going to be the same way you have healthy food in the pantry and you have your snack food in the pantry. In your technology, bake in things that are taking care of you and not just taking you for a ride.
Can I just add one thing? What you were saying was the fact that mindfulness now is throughout the whole tech world.
That's right.
Like Salesforce said that on every floor, there's a mindfulness room and a technology, and they talk about it constantly. So I think it's,
if it can penetrate in that space, it can be integrated into our personal lives, and it's so important. So again, thank you, Michael. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone who joined. Please share, comment. Michael, where can people reach you or learn more about your wonderful work?
You know, msugarman1 at sbcglobal.net, or, you know. Okay.
Well, I'll post everything. Again, you can see the playback and all the notes that Michael will share, and resources and apps, and everything that was discussed today will be up in a few days.
Well, the gratitude journal writing too, and, you know, too.
So check out schneiderspeech.com/our-blog, and you'll see all the conversations, including this one with Michael, and links and resources. Everyone have a wonderful day. Stay safe, stay healthy, keep breathing, and keep talking.